Behind the explosive riffs, the wild stage antics, and the headline-grabbing feuds, one man stood as the quiet, powerful backbone of Van Halen: Michael Anthony. Often overlooked by the public, his sacrifice and dedication were the unseen forces that held the band together, even as drama and chaos swirled around them. But Michael's story isn't just about bass lines and backing vocals. It's a tale of loyalty tested, credits stripped away, and a betrayal discovered not through a personal conversation, but through the impersonal coldness of the internet. In this untold chapter of rock history, you'll see how Michael Anthony's steady rhythm was the unsung pulse of Van Halen, even when the spotlight seemed forever out of reach. But there's a moment that forever altered the trajectory of his journey, one that didn't take place on stage. Brace yourself, because the revelation ahead might shatter everything you thought you knew about the legendary band. Michael Anthony's musical roots were planted early, shaped by a profound connection to music, particularly through his father, Walter Soilowski, a trumpet player. Walter's influence left an indelible mark on young Michael, who spent countless hours listening to his father practice and perform. This environment of live, real-world music set the stage for Michael's own musical evolution. Initially drawn to the trumpet, he quickly shifted gears at age 13 when the allure of rock music took over. It wasn't long before Anthony gravitated toward the bass guitar, driven by the desire to stand out from his peers, most of whom were obsessed with playing guitar or drums. A pivotal moment came when a friend, Mike Hershey, lent him a Fender Mustang guitar, which Anthony modified into a bass by removing 2 strings. This impromptu transformation marked a defining moment in his musical growth. Soon after, his father, recognizing his son's budding talent, purchased a Fender Precision bass and a Gibson amplifier, offering Michael the tools to refine his craft. Inspired by bass legends like Jack Bruce of Cream, John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin, and Harvey Brooks of Electric Flag, Michael's early influences shaped his playing style. Though naturally left-handed, he taught himself to play right-handed, showcasing his adaptability, a skill that would define his identity as a musician. His growing technical prowess and finely tuned ear would serve as the bedrock of his contributions to Van Halen's sound. The early 1970s saw Michael Anthony diving deep into the Southern California music scene, performing with local bands before finding his place in one group that would change everything: Snake. A power trio blending hard rock with blues influences, Snake gave Michael the opportunity to hone his skills, both on bass and as a lead vocalist. The band played local clubs, school dances, and festivals, building a modest but loyal fan base in the Pasadena and Arcadia areas. It was during this time that Snake crossed paths with a band that would become iconic: Mammoth. Featuring the Van Halen brothers, Eddie and Alex, Mammoth often played at the same venues as Snake, and one fateful night, Snake opened for the band. When Mammoth's PA system malfunctioned, Michael offered to let them use Snake's equipment to salvage the show. This generous gesture left a lasting impression on the Van Halen brothers, and it set the stage for a life-changing collaboration. As fate would have it, Mammoth's bassist, Mark Stone, had just left, creating a vacancy. Eddie and Alex, remembering Michael's professionalism and musicianship from their previous encounters, invited him to a jam session. The chemistry was instant. Michael's high-energy bass lines and powerful vocal harmonies added a new layer to the band's sound, and before long, he was officially invited to join. With Michael Anthony on board, the group made a bold decision to change their name from Mammoth to Van Halen, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their musical journey. The name change, which was prompted by the fact that another band was already using the name Mammoth, would come to symbolize the band's evolution. With David Lee Roth on vocals, Eddie Van Halen on guitar, Alex on drums, and Michael on bass, the classic lineup was solidified. This lineup would go on to redefine rock music and etch their name in the annals of history. For Michael, joining Van Halen was a game changer. It was the launch pad to an international career that would elevate him from a local musician to a rock icon. Yet, as the band skyrocketed to fame, Michael remained the steady force keeping the band grounded. As Van Halen's fame exploded, Michael Anthony quickly proved himself to be an integral part of the band's identity. On stage, his high-pitched backing vocals became a defining feature of their sound, providing a harmony that contrasted beautifully with Eddie's shredding guitar. But Michael's contributions went far beyond his vocal abilities. His steady bass lines were the pulse of the band, anchoring their chaotic energy and ensuring their musical foundation was solid. Despite his crucial role in the band's success, Michael was often overshadowed by the more flamboyant personalities of his bandmates. Eddie's virtuosic guitar playing and Roth's charismatic frontman presence often commanded the spotlight. But Michael's quiet dedication, his willingness to support the band both musically and personally, was the glue that held them together during the most turbulent times. As the years went by, however, Michael's loyalty would be tested in ways he never anticipated. He found himself at the center of a controversy that would reshape his relationship with the band and forever alter the course of his career. What transpired behind the scenes, an unexpected betrayal, was a stark contrast to the public image of the band as a unit. Michael would soon discover that his contribution to Van Halen's success, the one thing that had always been constant, would be diminished not in private discussions, but through a public revelation that would change everything. And this revelation wasn't about music, it was about loyalty, trust, and the cost of being part of rock and roll history. Stay tuned, because what's coming next could completely change how you see the band and the quiet, unsung hero who played the bass. In the world of rock and roll, few bands have shaped the genre's landscape as dramatically as Van Halen. At the heart of their meteoric rise was not just the virtuosity of Eddie Van Halen's guitar, nor the iconic flamboyance of David Lee Roth, but the steady and unwavering presence of Michael Anthony. His bass lines were a vital, unspoken backbone to the band's signature sound, providing the essential rhythm that allowed Eddie's explosive solos and Alex Van Halen's thunderous drumming to truly shine. But Michael Anthony was far more than just the silent engine powering Van Halen's machine. His harmonies, rich and precise, anchored many of the band's greatest anthems. His background vocals on tracks like Running with the Devil, Ain't Talkin' About Love, Jaime's Crying, and Feel Your Love Tonight were integral to the band's sound, earning him widespread acclaim for his unique vocal blend of power and melody. Van Halen's self-titled 1978 debut album was a breakthrough, and Anthony's contributions stood out. He wasn't just a bassist. He was a vocal force who helped define the band's identity in the crowded rock scene. As the band catapulted to stardom, Anthony's role became even more vital, both musically and personally. Unlike many other rock stars, Anthony was the epitome of reliability, steadfast in his commitment to the band's vision. In an era of volatile egos, he was the dependable presence that held things together. Early on, Anthony was treated as an equal, both musically and financially. He received his share of profits and was involved in key decisions, from album sales and tours to merchandise. According to former manager Noel Monk, Anthony was an equal partner, responsible for 20% of the band's debts and revenues. However, as Van Halen's success soared, so did the internal power struggles. The financial and decision-making power began to shift towards Eddie, Alex, and Roth, and Anthony found himself sidelined, both in terms of money and influence. Yet, through it all, his dedication to the music never wavered. Even as tensions between band members escalated, Anthony remained the consistent professional force behind the scenes, contributing to some of Van Halen's most successful years. His bass playing and backing vocals were pivotal, especially during the late 1970s and early 1980s when the band hit multi-platinum success. Fair Warning and Diver Down solidified Anthony's role as an essential part of the rhythm section. Despite the chaos, his contributions to the band's live performances and recordings were indispensable. While Eddie's guitar work dazzled and Roth's antics grabbed attention, Anthony quietly became the unsung pillar upon which the band's musical cohesion rested. But the cracks were starting to show. By 1984, Van Halen was at the height of its commercial success. The release of 1984 marked a peak in the band's career with massive hits like Jump, Panama, and Hot for Teacher. However, internally, tensions were reaching a boiling point. In a dramatic twist, Michael Anthony, despite being one of the founding members and a key contributor to the band's vocal identity, found himself pushed aside. It was during the 1984 tour that the band's financial and legal structure shifted dramatically. According to Noel Monk's memoir, Running with the Devil, Anthony was pressured into signing away his future songwriting credits and royalties. In a moment that seemed both surreal and cruel, Anthony was presented with the contract just hours before a performance. Eddie, Alex, and Roth stood over him while he signed away his rights. The deal was retroactive, meaning Anthony forfeited credit and revenue for his contributions to the 1984 album itself, despite his integral role in its creation. The ramifications were profound. By signing away his rights, Anthony lost millions in potential earnings from future licensing deals, greatest hits albums, and reissues that included his work. The 1984 album alone sold over 10 million copies in the US, making it one of the band's most lucrative records. But Anthony saw none of that revenue. For decades, his lack of songwriting credits overshadowed his legacy. Despite the personal and financial toll, Anthony maintained his professionalism, never publicly criticizing his bandmates, even as he quietly carried the weight of that decision. It wasn't until much later, in interviews and fan Q&A sessions, that Anthony finally revealed the pressure he was under to sign the contract. He admitted that, though it was unjust, he did it to avoid confrontation and keep the band intact. The 1984 contract debacle stands as one of the starkest examples in rock history of how power struggles within a band can strip an original member of both creative and financial control. But perhaps the most painful twist came later, when Eddie Van Halen, the very man Anthony had stood by through thick and thin, publicly criticized him. In a 2015 interview with Billboard, Eddie claimed that he had to teach Anthony how to play every note, accusing him of lacking initiative and skill. The comments were not only jarring but sparked a firestorm of backlash. Fans and fellow musicians alike were quick to defend Anthony, calling out Eddie's remarks as not only unfair but historically inaccurate. After decades of hard work and dedication, Anthony was suddenly being undermined in the public eye. Eddie's words cut deeply, especially given the long history between the two. Anthony had always been a loyal soldier, faithfully supporting the band even when tensions were at their peak. His role had been essential to Van Halen's success, and yet, by the time of Eddie's passing in 2020, their relationship had soured beyond repair. The rift between them remained one of rock's great unsolved mysteries, an example of how even the tightest creative partnerships can unravel under the strain of ego, miscommunication, and unresolved conflict. While delivering his signature high-harmony vocals, Michael Anthony quietly weathered the storm of criticism, most notably from Eddie Van Halen. In response to Eddie's allegations, Anthony firmly maintained in interviews that the claims were completely unfounded. He emphasized that he had always learned the band's material on his own, and there were no sessions where Eddie had to teach him the bass parts. Anthony pointed out that if such instances had occurred, they would have been documented, yet no such evidence ever surfaced. His steadfast rebuttal left little room for doubt. Eddie's claims, he asserted, were exaggerated or perhaps even fabricated. However, it wasn't just the criticism that stung. It was the personal toll it took on him. In several reflective interviews, Anthony admitted that the harsh words, especially from someone he had known for decades, and once considered a close collaborator, were deeply hurtful. He described the experience as emotionally draining, particularly because of his long-standing loyalty to the band and his efforts to keep things harmonious during volatile times. Publicly, the backlash cast a brief but undeniable shadow over Anthony's professional image, leading new fans to question his abilities despite his extensive experience and the praise he had received from other musicians. Though Anthony never stirred a public quarrel, he did admit that the growing rift between him and Eddie contributed to the eventual erosion of their once solid bond. By the mid-2000s, their communication had all but ceased. Quietly, Michael was pushed out of the band's core activities. After Eddie's passing in 2020, Anthony expressed regret that the relationship was never repaired. Despite the harsh public statements and the media circus, he revealed in interviews that he had always hoped for a chance to reconcile and find closure. Sadly, that opportunity never came. The divide between the two served as a stark reminder of how even the most legendary creative partnerships can be marred by ego, miscommunication, and unresolved conflict. But the tension didn't remain confined to the public eye. Behind the scenes, a gradual but unmistakable shift was underway, one that saw Michael Anthony's role in Van Halen quietly diminish. By the late 1990s, his presence in the band was waning in subtle but significant ways. During the recording of Van Halen 3 in 1998, Anthony played bass on only 3 of the album's 11 tracks. Eddie Van Halen, taking on bass duties for the remainder of the songs, signaled a clear shift in the band's internal dynamics. Though Anthony still appeared in promotional materials and toured with the band after the album's release, his limited participation in the studio raised questions about his standing within the group. It was a turning point, marking the beginning of a gradual sidelining of his once central role in the band. As Van Halen entered the 2000s, Michael's visibility within the band continued to shrink. Despite being involved in early reunion talks and participating in interviews and rehearsals, his contributions to recordings were increasingly limited. When the band released The Best of Both Worlds in 2004, Anthony was conspicuously absent from the 3 new tracks featured on the album. His only contribution was backing vocals. This exclusion added fuel to the perception that his role in the band had been marginalized, as the Van Halen brothers took tighter control over the musical and business direction of the group. The 2004 reunion tour with Sammy Hagar marked Anthony's final stint with Van Halen. But even this reunion came with its own tensions. Anthony had to agree to a reduced financial offer and sign a contract that treated him more like a hired musician than a full-fledged band member. While the tour was successful in terms of ticket sales and fan reception, it did little to heal the emotional scars that had built up over the years. Anthony later admitted that he wanted to move on and maintain a professional attitude, but the growing signs pointed to the fact that the band no longer saw him as an integral part of their future. Behind the scenes, plans were already in motion to replace him, plans he wouldn't fully grasp until much later. In 2006, Eddie Van Halen made the decision to bring in his teenage son, Wolfgang Van Halen, as Michael Anthony's replacement. This change wasn't formally communicated to Anthony. He learned of it through rumors and online reports. In later interviews, he admitted feeling blindsided and deeply hurt by the way the transition was handled. The betrayal was compounded by the fact that after decades of loyalty and significant contributions to the band's legacy, he never received a simple phone call to inform him of the decision. The emotional blow left him reeling as he was unceremoniously removed from the band he had helped build from the ground up. His relationship with the Van Halen brothers, once so close, had deteriorated to the point where this exit felt like the official end of his time with the band. After his departure from Van Halen, Michael Anthony found a new musical path, reconnecting with his longtime friend and former bandmate, Sammy Hagar. Their musical chemistry, forged during the Van Hagar era of Van Halen, became the foundation for several successful collaborations. In 2005, they formed The Other Half, a touring act that allowed them to perform Van Halen classics from both the Roth and Hagar eras. The group was enthusiastically received by fans, many of whom were eager to see the duo revive the spirit of the original band. The name The Other Half was a tongue-in-cheek acknowledgement of how they had often been overshadowed by the Van Halen brothers, but their live shows were a celebration of the music that had defined a generation. In 2002, Anthony and Hagar also formed Planet Us, a short-lived supergroup that included guitar virtuoso Joe Satriani and drummer Dean Castronovo. Though the group never released a full album or completed a tour, the project demonstrated Anthony's continued ability to collaborate with rock royalty and solidified his standing in the music world outside of Van Halen. However, it was Chickenfoot, formed in 2008, that would prove to be Anthony's most successful project after Van Halen. Once again teaming up with Sammy Hagar, the band also included Joe Satriani and drummer Chad Smith of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Chickenfoot quickly gained a devoted following, and their debut album became a hit, showcasing Anthony's enduring talent and versatility as a musician. Following the death of Eddie Van Halen in 2020, fans and band members alike found themselves grappling with the loss of one of rock's greatest legends. As the dust settled, the idea of a tribute tour began to gain traction in 2021 and 2022, spurred by Alex Van Halen's outreach to former bandmates, including Michael Anthony and David Lee Roth. The concept was to honor Eddie's legacy with a lineup that would remain true to the essence of Van Halen, featuring Joe Satriani as a potential stand-in guitarist. Discussions seemed promising, with many fans and insiders hopeful for a moment that could bring some closure to the band's storied history. However, despite initial excitement, the plans began to unravel due to internal disagreements. The root of the discord lay in David Lee Roth's reluctance to fully embrace the tribute format. Sources close to the situation indicated that Roth refused to participate in any concert that overtly honored Eddie's memory, at least not in the way the rest of the group envisioned. This standoff created a serious roadblock, stalling any real progress on the tribute tour. Additionally, Alex Van Halen's own health issues, particularly a back injury in 2022, made it increasingly unlikely he would be able to participate in such a physically demanding tour. With two of the most essential members sidelined and Roth's reluctance to engage fully, the reunion and tribute tour were officially canceled, leaving Michael Anthony without the chance for closure and a final reunion with the band he helped build. Though he had reconciled with Wolfgang Van Halen to some extent, the unresolved tensions with Roth and Alex remained, making the possibility of a reunion more and more impossible. The cancellation was a bitter disappointment for fans who had long hoped to see the surviving members of Van Halen come together for one final performance. Despite the enthusiasm for a reunion, the harsh reality of the band's fractured dynamics proved too difficult to overcome. The dream of a full-circle moment for Van Halen, complete with all key figures, quietly slipped away, leaving fans with a sense of unfulfilled potential. Meanwhile, Eddie Van Halen's ex-wife, actress Valerie Bertinelli, became one of the most vocal opponents to any biopic or dramatization of Eddie's life during her lifetime. She openly expressed her desire to protect her late husband's legacy from the inevitable Hollywood distortions. Bertinelli made it clear that she would not allow such a film to happen before I'm dead, citing concerns over how Eddie's personal struggles, especially his battle with addiction, might be sensationalized for entertainment purposes. For Valerie, the idea of seeing her ex-husband's life dramatized was not only emotionally overwhelming, but also an unwelcome invasion of the family's privacy. She wanted to preserve the integrity of Eddie's memory without reducing it to a Hollywood narrative. Though she jokingly suggested that singer Selena Gomez could play her in a potential movie, she quickly clarified that she hoped Gomez would decline if ever asked. Valerie's stance mirrored that of Wolfgang Van Halen, who has consistently voiced his own desire to honor his father through authenticity and music, rather than through dramatized retellings of his complex life. In the wake of Eddie Van Halen's passing in 2020, his son Wolfgang has faced the Herculean task of not only carving out his own musical identity, but also safeguarding his father's monumental legacy. Born into rock royalty, Wolfgang's journey has been anything but easy, weighed down by the often unfair burden of public comparison. For years, the Van Halen name has loomed large, a legacy so iconic that every move he makes is scrutinized, dissected, and measured against the towering figure of his late father. But Wolfgang, with a maturity beyond his years, has consistently shown a resolute determination to build his own future, independent of the shadow cast by Eddie's genius. Wolfgang has never been shy about addressing the complexities of being the son of one of rock music's greatest guitarists. In numerous interviews, he's made it clear that he is tired of being trapped in the echo of Van Halen's past. He's been outspoken about the toxic fan culture that demands not only nostalgia, but also an unrealistic return to the golden years of the band. For many, the idea of a reunion is tantalizing, a chance to relive the glory days of Van Halen's heyday. But for Wolfgang, this is not the path he wishes to follow. He has repeatedly stated that his father's legacy should be respected, not exploited for sentimental purposes. Instead of looking backward, Wolfgang has turned his attention to his own musical career, embarking on a journey with his band, Mammoth WVH. In this new project, he writes, records, and performs every aspect of the music, displaying a level of artistry that stands firmly on its own merits. His album, Mammoth WVH, released in 2021, was a testament to his abilities as a songwriter and musician, showing that he is capable of far more than simply being Eddie Van Halen's son. Through Mammoth WVH, Wolfgang has carved a musical identity that transcends his lineage, proving that he is an artist in his own right. Yet, despite his desire to move forward, the specter of his father's legacy is never far behind. The media, fans, and industry insiders continually seek to draw parallels between Wolfgang and Eddie, as if the younger Van Halen's career should be measured in the same breath as his father's. This comparison, though flattering, is one that Wolfgang has repeatedly pushed back against. In his view, it's not only an unfair expectation, but also a way to commodify Eddie's name and legacy. He's publicly voiced his frustration with the constant media comparisons and has made it clear that he will not allow his father's name to be used for commercial gain in any manner that doesn't honor Eddie's memory authentically. For Wolfgang, any potential tribute to his father's legacy must be approached with the utmost respect. While there has been considerable speculation about posthumous releases from Eddie's extensive vault of unreleased recordings, Wolfgang has emphasized that these projects must be handled with care. Guitarist Steve Lukather, a longtime friend of Eddie's and a member of the band Toto, revealed in 2023 that he and Alex Van Halen had begun to explore the material Eddie left behind. The thought of a posthumous Van Halen album or tour is undeniably intriguing, but Wolfgang is cautious about such endeavors. "There are no plans at the moment for a new Van Halen album or tour," he said, reinforcing his stance that the band cannot exist without Eddie. For Wolfgang, it's about maintaining the integrity of his father's music and legacy, not rushing to cash in on the sentimental value of his father's name. In his heart, Wolfgang knows that the Van Halen legacy is inextricably linked to his father, yet he also understands that the time for a reunion or revival has passed. He is adamant that his father's contributions to rock music are irreplaceable and should not be diluted by any attempt to recreate the past. As much as fans might clamor for a Van Halen revival or a tribute tour, Wolfgang remains steadfast in his commitment to preserving his father's legacy on his own terms. The notion of a reunion with David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar, or even a tribute tour with Joe Satriani standing in for Eddie, might be alluring to some, but for Wolfgang, it represents a form of exploitation rather than a meaningful tribute. There is hope for honoring Eddie Van Halen's memory while allowing his son Wolfgang to forge his own path in music. Wolfgang aims to create a new legacy, respecting the Van Halen name without succumbing to nostalgia. He understands the importance of authenticity in preserving his father's legacy, emphasizing that any future projects must be genuine. Committed to honoring Eddie's spirit, Wolfgang is determined to thrive on his own merits while keeping his father's contributions alive.